So seeing that we are at 12 noon, I want to call this meeting to order. Welcome to the October 11, 2021 Committee of the Whole of the Tennessee Public Charter School Commission. This meeting will be available on the Commission's website after the conclusion of the meeting. Please remember to be recognized prior to speaking, making a motion or voting, and to turn on your mic when you want to speak, and remember to turn it off when you're not, because it will still catch your voice. Before we start our business, let me ask Chase if you would take a roll call, please.
Commissioner Hanson
Present.
is here. Commissioner Levine here. Is present. Commissioner Patterson here. Is present. Commissioner Smith, Commissioner Tucker
here.
Is present. Commissioner Woodson
Here.
Is present. Chairman Griscom
Here.
Is present. Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Today's agenda is a presentation from our Executive Director, Tess Stovall, and Dr. Eve Carney, who's always welcome. We're glad to see you again, Eve. Thanks for being here. From the Tennessee Department of Education. They'll be providing us with updates on the implementation of Public Chapter 490 related to exit pathways from the Achievement School District authorization. Does anyone have any comments to make regarding the agenda before we vote to approve? Do I have a second?
Hanson, second.
Thank you. Chase, would you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Hanson
Aye.
votes aye. Commissioner Levine
Yes.
votes aye. Commissioner Patterson
Yes.
votes aye. Commissioner Smith, Commissioner Tucker
Aye.
votes aye. Commissioner Woodson
Aye.
votes aye. Chairman Griscom
Aye.
votes aye. Mr. Chairman, the agenda is approved.
Thank you. So at this time, I would like to recognize Dr. Eve Carney and Tess Stovall to provide updates on the Achievement School District. And Dr. Carney, I know you've got a limited amount of time, but will questions be appropriate as long as it doesn't get into past the time I know you've got next meeting?
Absolutely.
Thank
Yes,
you.
sir. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me. Again, I'm Eve Carney, Chief of Districts and Schools at the department. One of the divisions I oversee is the School Turnaround Division and the Achievement School District, among a few others. And as Chairman Griscom noted, this is really around the Commission's role as we talk about schools exiting the ASD. We always want to make sure that we ground our work in the strategic priorities of the department. Those would be the things that you see on your screen, making sure that all students have access to a high-quality education, supports for student readiness so that they are career and college ready as they leave high school, providing those academic and non-academic needs, as well as ensuring that every student has access to and is taught by a highly effective teacher. For the work that I get to lead at the department, it's really in kind of what we call the fourth priority, which is the foundational priority that undergirds all of the top three that you see here. Things like accountability assessment, school turnaround, falling into that kind of foundational piece that undergirds the remainder of the priorities. So for today, we're going to talk about school accountability. I'm going to run through a few slides just for kind of level setting, and then we'll walk through some of the implications of Public Chapter 490, leaving some time for discussion, questions as we move through the end. We'll talk about Public Chapter 2 that passed recently in the special extraordinary session, and the impact it had also on priority schools and priority exit. We'll talk about a few of those other provisions that we are now grappling with as first time as we're approaching year 10 at the end of the first 10 years of the ASD. That includes the parent petition language, the commissioner designation, as well as the transition plans, and then just give you all an update so that you see what else is happening in that school turnaround space that will absolutely impact you as well. So really, at a very high level, I wanted to start with just some level setting on definitions because it can be a little challenging when you have state terminology as well as federal terminology. But I just want to recognize and just level set around terminology for Priority versus CSI, or Comprehensive Support and Improvement Schools. Priority is a state term. CSI is a federal term, really for capturing that lowest performing 5% of schools based on the state's accountability model. When we wrote the ESSA plan in 2017, it was intended, kind of at the same time that the General Assembly passed A through F, that those would just overlay and be one and the same. We had some testing challenges that kind of separated those for a moment, but going forward, those should be one and the same. So when we talk about priority and CSI, the criteria are the same in terms of the accountability model, but they're also the same exit criteria. Typically, we have between 85 and 90 priority schools identified every cycle, and that cycle is every 3 years. And those are the schools that we will continue to work and provide those additional supports through school improvement dollars, as well as other state supports. And while that public list comes out once every 3 years, schools have the ability to exit any year they meet that exit criteria that we'll talk about. As it relates to the ASD, any school that's in the most intensive intervention, which is the Achievement School District, is considered a comprehensive support and improvement school, just by being in that most intensive intervention. Focus schools is another state term. It goes back a little bit, but that focus term encompasses 2 federal designations, and that's targeted support and improvement, which is a school that is underserving a subgroup of students among the same schools statewide that have that same subgroup. And then a more elevated identification would be additional targeted support and improvement, stating that any school is performing at a level such that if that subgroup were a school, it would be in the bottom 5%. It is that designation that if you remain an ATSI school for 2 cycles, you become a priority school. So there is this new elevation that did not exist previously. And so some of those things that you see at the bottom are really just for your kind of level setting there. I mentioned the exit criteria for priority schools and CSI schools. You have to meet one of the sub-bullets that you see on your screen, which is a 1-year success rate for all student group exceeds the 15th percentile. I'm sorry, I said that backwards. The first one is 10th percentile for 2 consecutive years. So you're showing kind of that sustained increase over 2 consecutive years for the all-student group. The second way to exit is the 1-year success rate exceeding the 15th percentile in the all-students group, or earning a 4 or 5 in all accountability subjects for both of the 2 most recent years. So you have like an achievement pathway, you have a growth pathway, and then for schools that were identified for graduation rate, because that was another provision of ESSA, is that if you have a high school that has a graduation rate less than 67%, they are indeed a CSI school, and so you would have to earn a graduation rate higher than that for 2 consecutive, the 2 most recent years. As I mentioned, priority schools are identified publicly every 3 years, and the other way, as that list recalibrates every 3 years, you may also exit by not being in that bottom 5% in that 3rd year. So the public chapter 2 of the extraordinary session earlier this year, it covered a lot of various topics here around the use of 2021 data and information. I included those on here for the slide to be comprehensive, but I really want to focus in on the 4th bullet that says for LEAs having at least an 80% participation rate. Get some protections around things, including priority and ASD referral. So again, any school that reaches that 80% threshold will not have a letter grade assigned. Also, that data may not be used to identify a school as a priority school, nor can a school be referred to the Achievement School District or assigned to the ASD using that data on an upbeat if that data in some way supports you, because we did have a number of schools make gains and have kids in school for quite a bit of the year. If those scores helped you meet the exit criteria, then you absolutely could exit this year. And again, this is really the bullet that I wanted to focus in on. We did have some schools earning priority in CSI exit, and they are shown here on your screen. Libertas, Cornerstone Prep Denver, Lester Prep earned that in 2019. We also had one other school that was not in the bottom 5% in 2018, which is Cornerstone Prep Lester. I did not include that here because this was specific to this session and this priority list. So within that public chapter, there were several things that were updated and changed, and one of those is some authority around a school that's in the ASD that home LEA is earning the lowest accountability designation. So the district is earning the lowest accountability designation. And 60% of the parents want to remain in the Achievement School District. There is a provision that allows that to happen for the commissioner to review and approve. We have termed that, it originally was called kind of a parent trigger, but now we're kind of going with parent petition, because you're trying to make sure that parents have a voice in what happens with their students. And one of the things that you see here underlined is that the language says may remain in the ASD beyond the initial 10-year period. And so part of what we've been working with of late is ensuring that schools that are in year 10 have this information, understand this process, and Superintendent Lisa Settle has been sharing that petition with them. A little bit about the process that was established here. One, a school must be in its final year to execute that petition, because the original term is a 10-year term, and as a school gets to that 10th year, that is kind of the first criteria. Schools will have a period of time. Right now it's October 1 through 31. We're talking, again, year one, you're kind of level setting and doing some kind of checks against your process. But right now, that's the window that we're using to capture that 60% of signatures for parents. And if a parent has more than one child in a school, then that would count for every child that is enrolled. That petition is submitted to the district, which would be to the ASD, and then on to the commissioner before November the 1st or at the beginning of November in that 10th year of agreement. It is a petition, and it is something that can only be used one time. This is to keep the ASD from becoming a district rather than an intervention. When I say that, it is intended to be the state's most intensive intervention. And so as we move schools up and out, we want to make sure that we are leaving capacity to serve those schools that need it most. So that is kind of the eligibility and submission, and then of course when those come in, we know less than 15 days later we will have a response to those schools on that petition, either citing approval, a status of incomplete, and giving 10 additional days to update if there was something unclear or missing or additional information were needed, or it would be a denial of those three options. If the commissioner approves that petition, that school has earned 2 additional years in the Achievement School District to continue to focus on coming out of the bottom 5%, focusing on gaps and performance, and really it's 2 additional years, after which they follow the same options that any other school exiting would have. And that would be applying to their home LEA, for example, or if they earn exit, potentially putting forth an application to the commission. Another piece of this is this other pathway around the commissioner designation, and really this is about the authority that the commissioner has to remove a school from the ASD at any time. As we've been working on this new pathway to the Charter Commission when they earn exit, this is really kind of another kind of pathway to get to that space. And that is authority that the commissioner would have to designate a school. And so one of the things that we have been doing is setting up that criteria around that designation, as we're calling it. And that is that a school must be in at least year 8 of their 10-year agreement. And so making sure, and we picked that year knowing that an application to a home LEA takes about 18 months. So trying to get out there ahead of that, really trying to ensure that we are not in any way limiting an option for a school. It must be a charter school. We have currently some direct run schools as well as charter schools, and this is really around, per the bill language, around options for a charter school. And that school must have met the state participation rate on the annual assessments, so making sure that we are holding firm to that. The bill language also cites that this commissioner authority is to be grounded in both accountability and performance on the school performance framework. And so as you see at the bottom, those are weighted 40% each. And then a third indicator of school culture is 20%. And what we heard from stakeholders was, rather than having, just one or two things, we know that there are schools that are trending in a very positive way, that a lot of their other indicators are showing a different picture. And so this is not intended to override accountability or the SPF. It's intended to be kind of a percentage that could indicate that a school is just on the cusp of exit, so that we would account for that in this model. And just so you all are aware of what we're talking about within that third school culture indicator, we wanted to ensure that we were capturing items that we know matter in a high-performing school, and that would be the stability of the leadership, teacher mobility, chronic absenteeism, discipline remand. All of those are looking at 3-year trends over time of a decreasing chronic absenteeism, discipline remand. And then, of course, financial stability, viability, looking at enrollment trends, ensuring that we have a school that can sustain itself and that parents are choosing for their child. And last but not least, in the bill language is also the requirement for the development of a transition plan that all schools must have and be approved by the commissioner to exit ASD. You all may recall that we talked about this when the department was to develop the initial plan by January the 1st, 2021. That was submitted, and then this public chapter was passed, and that transition plan was updated this summer to reflect that additional pathway. It's available in the hyperlink in your slide deck, the most updated plan. It was really streamlined to put some of that data in an appendix in an attempt to streamline the actual plan template. I will note that as we think about the application process for this commission or for a home LEA, many of those criteria may have been met through those applications. We are not asking them to duplicate that, but in total, those plan requirements would be met either through an application to either their home LEA or the commission where appropriate, or through the development of a transition plan, making sure that we hold all schools to the same criteria, just knowing that there may be different pathways to meet there. Just a couple of things just to let you know what we're working on currently in the turnaround space. Right now, we are beginning to work closely with Shelby County Schools with the development of some transition plans for some of our direct run schools or for Georgian Hills, and we expect others to follow in the months to come. That's underway and will continue throughout this school year. We also have the state turnaround superintendent search well underway. Happy to report that we had 59 applicants and are in the middle of the interview process as we speak. Also, that new state turnaround superintendent will be engaging in a listening tour in the spring in the communities serving our ASD and priority schools, knowing that this position is not just an ASD position, but is actually overseeing the vision and implementation of the school turnaround framework that is inclusive of ASD. Also, this spring, we expect, or later in this year, we expect to re-engage communities around that framework. It feels like a lifetime ago, frankly, that we were in communities across this state. We had 6 listening tours, and the world has changed dramatically since then. So to reset with our stakeholders, we will begin to re-engage in that process. And of course, the reset of the ASD as we think about how to structure moving more to a kind of charter or zone model where we're not going to be direct running schools going forward. So lots of work happening there around getting that structure in place, knowing that the next priority list is scheduled right now, unless the U.S. Department of Education updates us differently, the fall of 2022. And I can tell there's lots of questions. Tess, I want to make sure you don't have anything from your point of view to add, but I want to just say thank you for the partnership as we're all kind of charting a new pathway for schools that have done the very hard work of meeting that criteria of priority exit, and look forward to your questions.
Chairman, the only thing I will add is for the good of the commission, we at this point have received 3 letters of intent for schools that Dr. Carney shared. We have received a letter of intent from Libertas and then the 2 cornerstone schools that were on that slide. The deadline for letters of intent is Friday, October 15th. But I wanted you all to give that context.
So, Dr. Carney, thank you for your update.
Yes.
Appreciate it. Commissioners, who has a question? Who'd like to start? Commissioner Tucker.
Thank you. Good morning. I just want to make sure I understand, and I think I do, but just want to make sure. So the parent petition
Yes.
is to keep schools in the ASD.
Yes,
Right.
that is correct.
And that's 60%, and I assume that's from ADM, like average daily membership. They're going
Correct.
to figure out the 60%. Okay.
And that's kind of why we waited a little bit to let the enrollment
Numbers kind of-
stabilize
right.
before we
Right.
collected that.
That makes sense. But all of these other pieces of this legislation that happened are about exit, but none of them impact our assessment of whether schools come into the commission, correct? That's the rule that we're talking about later today. So I just wanted to make sure I didn't miss anything. Like we are still as a commission, schools may apply to
Absolutely.
us, but we are
100%.
still as a commission determining whether they become part of our portfolio, right?
You're 100% correct in that assumption. The reason I included those other pieces is that it impacts who may be eligible to
Right.
submit an application to the commission for your consideration. It is in no way doing anything other than
Right,
that.
right. No, and I didn't think that. I just
Yeah.
want to make sure I understood because the question I had last time we had this conversation, and I'm going to have it again, is what happens to those schools that are eligible to exit the ASD? They apply at the Charter Commission. They are denied by the Charter Commission they're in Catholics call it purgatory. I don't know. What happens to those? Mainly, I actually care about what happens to those kids.
Yes. Let me just say this. As we know, what's in TCA is that a school can stay in the ASD for a period of 10 years. That parent petition is the only way for that to extend. But if a school, for example, reaches priority exit criteria in year 7, they submit a letter of intent, they put forth an application, this body decides they're not quite there yet. They would come back into the ASD for the remainder of their 10-year term. Now, yes, that does not preclude them from putting forth an application that following year. Perhaps they get feedback from this body to say, here are some things that we feel like were reservations for us, and they would have the opportunity to reapply, but it does protect them for that original 10-year period, after which we will begin talking with them in year 8 about perhaps applying to their home LEA, for example, as well, and that's what we expect.
If I can just follow up, but the home LEA doesn't have to take them back either.
That's
right?
correct.
All right, so is there anything, and I don't know an answer. I don't know what it would be, but is there anything out there that says what happens to these kids if nobody wants their school?
So the transition plan is that tool, and the reason why it's important is because we're talking about kids, and we're talking about seamless transitions from a school that has been governed from one group going somewhere, potentially back to the home LEA, if not to this commission. And so part of that is would be including about where students will attend, making sure that we're not just moving them from one school that's underperforming to another, really trying to be strategic, working with the districts on things like transportation, facilities, wanting to know also around data sharing so that the receiving district understands where students are, and making sure that they support students through that transition. And that's part of what we're working on currently with Shelby County, one school, for example.
One more question, and then
Yes.
I'll stop. Was there, or do you know, was there any conversation during all of this about the possibility of charters, whether it be charters that are exiting the ASD at the end of their 10 years, or more generally being their own LEAs? You know, about half the states in the country charters are their own LEAs. I mean, was that considered as a possibility so that these schools could stay as schools but be their own LEAs? Do you know?
That was not part of this conversation. I think that's not to say it's probably not something people are continuing to discuss, especially as we move away from direct-run schools and we're seeing more interest in more charter schools in places that we haven't seen them historically. Thank you. You're welcome.
Commissioner Woodson.
Thank you. And just to follow up on that, so are they prohibited right now from going and actually having their own CMO, or because they've got a path to apply here, to apply to their district? Is there a third path, or
Not
it's
at this
prohibited
time.
at this point? Okay. Mine's actually a separate question. Can you talk a little bit about the ASD search process? Just ideal profile, you mentioned it's going well. Would love to get a little bit more information on like the timeline, what highlights of the search, where you all are in the process, and when you, if they're going to be doing a tour in the spring, that's 5 minutes from now, it feels like. So I would love to hear a little bit about that search. What an
Absolutely.
important position. So
Probably the most important position, and it's something that again, we began that process kind of right before the pandemic got incredibly bad. We had candidates dropping out, et cetera, so we made the decision to pause and then reset when conditions were a little more stable. We are using an external search firm to do that search, and one of the things that we have been looking for in that candidate, of course, would be experience in a number of key areas. First and foremost, we want, ideally would have a candidate that has some turnaround experience in schools that, maybe look a little bit like our profile of schools that are current priority schools. That is not to say that we wouldn't look at a candidate who did not have that, but that is clearly one of the criteria. Really, more importantly, and what I have learned in doing this work is the ability to work with stakeholders in communities, in schools, rather than trying to say, well, we're going to make this policy from Nashville and hope that it sticks wherever those priority schools are across the state. And so really trying to make sure that we find someone that has that ability and that kind of leadership style, frankly, to be able to govern in an informed way. And a lot of the research supports that with ASD, making sure that when we talk about success in ASD, it is around ensuring that you're bringing your stakeholders along with you. You are using your community resources. No one does this work alone. And so trying to make sure that that is an integral part of not just the search, not just the tour, but the implementation day to day as we move forward with kind of the notion of we have to focus on fewer schools in the ASD, work really hard to build them up, help them build that sustainability so we can lift all of our schools and hope that that floor raises, and so that the bottom 5%, which is federally required, becomes a higher threshold. So really experience, leadership, having some experience around what high quality instruction looks like is also very, very important. Where we are in that process, we have looked through 59 applicants. We have made some initial cuts. We expect that we've had one round of kind of videos that we've been reviewing. We have another round of virtual interviews with a task, looking at some things and asking for them to talk us through how they are interpreting data, and not just that, but how they would go about improvement in these situations. And then we will have another round with our leadership at the department, including cabinet members, and also are including kind of a stakeholder meeting. And so what we will be asking, we have probably 10 to 12 representatives of our stakeholder groups that we will ask for them to submit questions in advance. We will have a moderator, and those stakeholders will listen and hear the answers and then give some reflection on that as part of our process. So we have that piece in there as well.
Great. And what's the
timeline?
deadline
Yes.
for when you're going to hopefully?
Our hope is that we have our candidate identified before the end of this month, and then ask that they onboard as early as possible in
Got it.
2022.
Last question. Who's the search firm you're using?
Ray and Associates.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much.
So, Dr. Carney, as you all have worked through this, and a lot of these changes came because of legislative action, as you talked about, are you seeing anything that you all might want to propose that might change the landscape one more time through legislation?
Let me think about that for just a moment. Honestly, I would like for us to go through a cycle to inform that a little bit more. For example, as we've been thinking about this parent petition and the timing of that, it was important that we waited long enough for that enrollment to stabilize, but we now know that we're also kind of pushing against the letter of intent here. And so that's likely an adjustment that we will make in our process. That would not require a legislative change, but just a change in the process that we have established, thinking perhaps we do that a little bit earlier so that schools understand what options they have. But beyond that, I think the first round of transition plans will also be very helpful as we have a school that perhaps is applying here and we can maybe do a little bit more of a crosswalk. But again, that's more in procedure rather than in code.
Do the schools in the ASD now, have they been notified? Do they sort of know the status that they're in at this point?
Yes. One of the things that, especially schools that are in priority exit or also those in year 10, those are the schools that we're currently working with on the things like transition plans, the parent petition, et cetera.
Can I go back to Commissioner Tucker's question?
Sure.
Because she has asked it before, and I think it is a key. What does happen to that school that's sort of left sitting out there? Come to us, and say, we don't approve them. What happens?
So if a school is, again, and they haven't exhausted their 10 years in, excuse me, if they haven't exhausted that original 10-year agreement in the Achievement School District, they will come back into the ASD and we will continue to provide that intensive support as they live out their original 10-year, contractual agreement. We have a memorandum of agreement with all of our schools. If a school, for example, were in year 10 or year 9, we would obviously work with that school to do a couple of other things. One, perhaps apply to the home LEA and try to be approved in that space. If not, those are the plans to me that are most important. When we think about, these were schools. Primarily, there's maybe one or two that were not, but typically these were schools that were in Shelby County or Davidson County previously. That is why it would be important for us to work alongside the district, also knowing that Shelby County has kind of a Reimagine 901 plan that they are undergoing currently, making sure and advocating for ensuring that students do transition seamlessly as possible, and that includes joint meetings and meeting with parents and understanding what quality options would be available. So again, as we kind of move into those transition plans, I think we'll learn a whole lot more, but I can promise you, front of mind for me are kids that are sitting in those seats.
Do I have other commissioners with questions? Commissioner Patterson.
I'm on. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Harney. Very comprehensive presentation. Really appreciate the work, and also really appreciate that you are engaging the local school districts as mine, Shelby County Schools. So, in terms of the parent petition process, can you talk a little bit about whether any schools have indicated that they're going to be going through?
Happy to talk about that. We have been told informally that we have several of our schools that are in year 10 who are currently in the process of collecting signatures. And that was really done and trying to make it as easy as possible for parents. We've done it through kind of QR code where they can just click on that, answer the questions, and confirm that they are in support of that. But to date, the schools that I have been told are using that parent petition, are in the process of collecting those signatures, would be Brick Church Middle here in Davidson County, as well as Georgian Hills, which is a direct run school, as well as Fraser Corning, again, two additional direct run schools, and then Westside Middle, as well as Cornerstone Prep Leicester, making sure I keep all of those straight. We have had one official letter submitted, and it was just forwarded to me this morning. But we expect that we will get those throughout the month of October as soon as they hit that threshold. But I will say, that we try to give them a sufficient amount of time, knowing that schools have fall break, trying to account for things like that.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Do I have other commissioners with questions? Seeing none. Dr. Carney, thank you for the presentation. It's very helpful to us, and wish us well, because tomorrow we step into our role as authorizers. So you helped sort of get us here early on, and so I hope you'll watch and sort of gives either a thumbs up or, maybe you need to work on a little
Well,
bit.
I appreciate that. I appreciate all that you all are doing. And of course, Tess and I work and check in regularly. Always happy to be a partner for this organization. And good luck as you embark on your new role.
Thank you. Tess, let me turn to you. Is there anything else that you would like to share with us today before we adjourn this meeting?
Tess Stovall, I think the only other thing that wanted to share, and we'll talk more about it at our Rules and Policy and Governance Committee, is that we are going to be discussing final reading of the ASD application process rules, which will govern our rules around and our process around the application process. We have already passed and filed the emergency rules. It's in progress. When you start dealing with other agencies, that's when things get slow. But those were passed on September 22nd. For the most part, the emergency rules and the final rules mirror each other. So I think we are prepared to engage in our application process beginning November 15th, which when applications are due. We are intending to schedule calls with everyone who submits a letter of intent to walk through the process, what they can expect. We want them to be good partners in this process. We do intend to hold a public hearing in the district in which each applicant is from, to both hear from parents, stakeholders, and also give the local boards of education an opportunity to be heard on the record. So at this point, I think the staff is feeling very comfortable with the letters of intent we have received right now and executing from there.
Thank you. I asked Tess about this, so I just want to thank all the staff that's here. We're going to have a formal introduction tomorrow, so we've got some new staff members who've joined us. But thank you all for the continued work you do in a time where we know things are a little up in the air and trying to figure out, do I show up or not, and all this. But we're speaking for this commission. I want to thank you all, because I know the continued good work you're doing, and particularly as we get ready to move, we're in the role that we were set up to do. And you all are going to be the ones that make sure that we're actually able to perform. So thank you. We'll talk a little bit more about this tomorrow. Does any other commissioner have a comment they'd like to make? Commissioner Smith, welcome. It's good to see you.
Thank you. And for all the Nashville drivers, please learn to drive when the sun is out. Thank you.
Well, seeing no other commissioners with a red light on, may I entertain a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Do I have a second? Second. Seeing no other discussion, Chase, would you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Hanson?
Aye.
Votes aye. Commissioner Levine? Yes. Votes aye. Commissioner Patterson?
Yes.
Votes aye. Commissioner Smith?
Yep.
Votes aye. Commissioner Tucker?
Aye.
Votes aye. Commissioner Woodson?
Aye.
Votes aye. Chairman Griscom?
Yes.
Votes aye. The motion is approved.
Thank you. We meet again tomorrow, same room, correct, at 9 a.m. for our regular Public Charter School Commission. And we've got 2 committee meetings this afternoon. So with that, we are adjourned. Thank you.